Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's talk put on by the Upper Thames branch of the Butterfly Conservation. My name is Carla Boswell from the Parks Trust in Milton Keynes, and we are kindly hosting tonight's presentation in partnership. So I will hand you over to the fantastic Sue Taylor, who is giving the presentation tonight on Clearwing moths. She is a local enthusiast and well, there'll be plenty of opportunity to ask questions. If I'm going to put you all on mute, if that's okay, and hand you over to Sue.
Right, hello everybody. Welcome. Carla, have you see my screen and everything's all right?
I can. Everything looks good.
That's great. Okay. Right. Well, my name's Sue Taylor. I'll be taking through this introduction to clearwing moths, and specifically the species found in the Upper Thames region, and that's Buckinghamshire, Berkshire, and Oxfordshire. I'm a volunteer with Butterfly Conservation, and I've got a broad interest in entomology, and that's not just moths and butterflies. So last year, despite lockdown, I was fortunate enough to see many more clearwings than I've ever seen before. And I just wanted to share with people what I've learned about these fascinating little creatures. If you do have questions, then I will try and answer them at the end of each section, and there'll be a slide where you'll see that there's time for questions. I'm well aware that there may be some people listening who are more expert than me and may be better placed, in fact, to answer your questions, and I'll welcome that expertise. This presentation's got a lot of information, as I'm hoping it will go on the Upper Thames website where people can refer to it later. So don't need to write anything down. You don't have to learn it. Hopefully you can just enjoy. Okay. Right. So clearwing moths. I think these are lovely little moths, and to me their wings resemble stained glass, partially clear and partially patterned with beautiful colours. Unlike many other day-flying moths, they're rarely seen by the casual observer. They seem to hide away, and they don't spend a lot of time on flowers, and they don't fly all day. So to catch sight of one is always a treat and unexpected. As a result of all that, they are very under-recorded and as a group. And we do need more records to establish both the range and population size of these species. So what are they? They are wasp mimics, best shown in these two hornet mimic species. And you can see there the hornet moth I've shown there, and it does look quite hornet-like. They don't just mimic hornets, they also possibly mimic solitary wasps. And it's because they are mimicking wasps that they have narrow wings with clear panels. And that's referred to as Batesian mimicry, because it's something which is harmless, which is pretending to be something which could possibly harm whatever's trying to eat the moth. As well as looking quite like wasps, their flight also mimics wasps. They fly fast with their wings in a blur, and that's another reason why people who are looking for butterflies and moths may miss them, because the jizz is more like that of a wasp or a fly than it is of a butterfly or a moth. So if you go out looking for butterflies and moths, you may just not see it. These days, modern pheromone lures are helping us to learn more about the enigmatic insects that these are. And last year, during the first COVID lockdown, people were using lures in their gardens and in reserves. So we did get some good sightings in 2020. And if any of you want to look it up, in the Herts and Middlesex Butterfly Conservation newsletter number 81, Liz Goodyear wrote about her experience of using lures in her garden, and it's well worth a read. It may well be on their website. So they are classified as there's the Ceciidae, which I think is a real mouthful to say. I think clearwing moths is much more descriptive. And I thought maybe it'd be good to find out what that actually breaks down to. And it basically means new moth, the family of new moths. So it's not very descriptive either. They are small moths, and although they're very small, they are still classed in with the macro moths. Worldwide, there's around 1,370 species, as far as we know, and Europe is lucky enough to have 100. But we in the UK have only 15 species resident at the moment. More may come, of course. But in this area, this region, Berkshire and Oxfordshire, we do have 12 species. So relatively speaking, we are quite a hotspot for them. Of the 15 species in the UK, 11 of them, that's a really high proportion, are nationally scarce bee species, which means that they are only found in a limited number of hectares in the UK. Two of the species are the Welsh and the fiery Clearwings, are classed as nationally rare red data book species and are protected by law additionally. We don't have either of those in this region. Unfortunately, the dusky Clearwing is now thought to be extinct. I believe there was one record within the last 5 years. I think it was in Jersey, but on the mainland, it seems to be extinct. But we have gained recently the raspberry Clearwing, which is likely to have come in with raspberry canes. Right, I'll be talking quite a lot about pheromone lures because they are really helping us to understand a bit more about these moths, about their distribution and the densities, where they occur. And it's possible that they are more common than we previously understood. Before the use of lures, people used to go out into the field and they would have to search for larvae and pupa and try and raise them. This was quite hit and miss and quite difficult. So before the lures were around, it was actually quite difficult to monitor these species. Some records could come from sweeping vegetation, but that doesn't work for all of them. And the rest were casual observations. And as they tend to hide quite a lot, again, that didn't leave very many. So please, all records of Clearwing moths are warmly invited. And if you do see a Clearwing moth, put your sightings onto iRecord or send directly to your county moth recorder, preferably with the photograph, and keep in mind what vegetation is around because that can be a strong indicator of what species you may have. So that's a thrift Clearwing that you can see there, which we do not get in this area, but pretty little moth. So the biology of them, the Ceciliidae are closely related to the much better known burnets and forester moths. The forester moths are usually bright green, they're getting rarer, but the burnet moths usually are very familiar to people with their black wings with red dots on. And both groups are most active in warm and sunny weather. However, they differ in that the Clearwings are usually only active or most active in the morning. And that's when the males are looking for recently emerged and unmated females, because the burnets and the foresters tend to be out a bit longer. Most of the Clearwings use trees or shrubs for their larvae, and an egg is usually laid on a cut or winded surface, and then the larvae burrows into the plant. Where on the plant depends on the species. Some species stay just under the bark, others burrowing right into the wood or forming galls on stems. The exception to this is the six-belted and the thrift Clearwings. And the six-belted lives on the roots of the bird's foot trefoil and occasionally kidney vetch, and the thrift Clearwing on thrift. So some species have a year-long cycle, but others take 2 or more years, which means overwintering twice as caterpillars larvae before emerging to pupate in the spring. And there is only one flight period for the adults in the UK for each of our species. All are univoltine, in other words. But if you get to the more tropical areas of the world, then there are species which are multivoltine, because there's more than one generation or more than one flight period a year. The sallow clearwing is a strange one because you're most likely to see it if it's an even year. So 2020 was a good year for sallow clearwings, and the next good year is likely to be 2022. But we will see what happens this year as people will have their pheromone lures out. Right, has anybody got any questions so far?
Sue, I just wonder, I know you're coming back to lures later, but perhaps you should explain what a pheromone is, in case, I'm sure that the audience is very knowledgeable and they know, but it wouldn't hurt to go through what a pheromone is, because people might not be sure what a pheromone lure is.
Okay, well, I am going to describe that later,
Yes,
but in terms of what pheromones are, they are basically chemicals which, in this case, the female will emit to let the male know that she is around and is unmated, and it's basically a signal to come and find her, because they're not densely found, the moths aren't found densely in any particular area, so to meet up it's useful if there's chemicals in the air where they can follow the trail and find the females. And there's quite a lot of moths and actually other species which undertake this sort of behaviour, and pheromones generally are widespread within the animal kingdom.
All right, thank you. There are no other questions in the chat at the moment, Sue, so I think we could probably carry on.
Okay, right. Pheromone lures, there we go. So until recently, sightings of adults have been very sparse and restricted to lucky sightings from people being in the right place at the right time, and individual moths being swept from vegetation. I managed to see 3 species without a lure last year, and that's very unusual. It's mostly, it's a blue moon when people actually manage to see a clearwing moth without using a lure. We're now in a position where there are lures available for each of the species in the UK, and these are getting more and more reliable as new ones are developed. Originally, they were developed as the ones are that you might use for clothes moths to try and get rid of pest species in other countries. So that's what they were for. So a pheromone lure is basically a rubber bung or a plastic vial, and it's been impregnated with chemicals that mimic the pheromone scent that the receptive female gives out. It's not an identical thing, it's just a mimic of it. The males then detect the chemicals and fly to the lure, expecting to find a receptive female. And if you look at the photo, you can see a couple of six-belted clearwing males flying towards the rubber bung lure there. The lure is often put into a trap which allows the moth to fly in and then later be released unharmed. Fly in from a distance, so you don't have to be there all the time. Without the trap, they soon realise their mistake and leave very quickly. And of course, because the pheromones are mimicking females, the females aren't interested. It will only attract the male moths. Having the lures available is allowing us to more accurately map the distribution and abundance of these moths, and it is something that you can do in your garden or on land where you've got permission. The lures are available for purchase, and advice on their use is available from the Anglian Lepidopterist supplies. And I don't know of another supplier, so it's there may be others, but as far as I'm aware, they are the only supplier at the moment in the UK. Okay, so how to use a lure? Well, you will receive it in a little plastic bag with either the bung or the vial in it, and then you need to take that and put it into something like a little mesh bag like this, and then put it into another container, and then pop it into your freezer, because that way you will stop the chemicals dispersing, and you can keep that lure active for up to 3 years. So using the lures, there is actually no guarantee using a lure that you will see a clearwing, because they are a little bit fickle. But if you get everything in a row, you do your research, your preparation, and with persistence, you do stand a good chance of seeing clearwing moths. Do ensure that you've got permission from the landowner, especially on nature reserves, to trap. Then find a location where the food plant for the species that you are hoping to see is known to occur, and preferably where there's quite a lot of that. Some species will fly a long way to a lure, but not all will, so it's best to be near the food plant. You also need to know when the moth will fly. The adults have a short time in terms of which months they fly in or which weeks they fly in, and then they have particular times of the day when they fly. So you need to get the time of day and the days in the months right to stand a chance of seeing things. You need to check the weather before you go, because they fly best in warm, sunny weather with a light breeze. If it's too hot, too cold, too windy, then they are much less active, and you're much less likely to see any clearwings. Where you put the lure is also important. For most of them, around head height is a good idea. For the six-belted clearwing, the lure can be put on the ground, actually amongst the food plants, i.e. bird's foot trefoil. And again, follow the advice which the suppliers give you, and then you should be okay. At the bottom, I can't quite see it because it's covered up by other things. There's an image of a commercially available trap. The green lid has got a little cage in it where the rubber bung or vial goes, and then the moths will come in from the side, hopefully sit on the top of the yellow bit, and then go down into the trap where they can be inspected later and released unharmed. Right, again, using the lures. Do store them in a freezer, and the domestic one about -18, and that will keep them going for about 3 years. You do need to keep them stored very separate, each in a separate little bag, each in a separate container, and label them really carefully, because it can get quite confusing otherwise. They all look, there's nothing else to differentiate them. Before you use them, take them out of the freezer, and while they are still in the container that you've chosen to put them in, allow them to rise to ambient temperatures so that condensation does not get on the rubber band or the vial itself. I believe that if that happens, then the chemicals will get to some extent washed off. You also need to keep them very separate at all times. We can't detect these, we can't smell these chemicals, but they are very pervasive, and the moths can easily detect very, very small amounts. So I've heard of people who've got traps that they've used, they've washed them carefully, they've dried them, and then they've put in a different lure, and it still had the original species turn up. So these things can easily be transferred from one to another. So it's really important to keep them separate, because the moths can get confused, and when the wrong things are turning up, it's also quite confusing for us. When you get to site, also check the wind direction and place the trap or the lure upwind of the food plants. You'll need to hang the traps in light shade to prevent them overheating, and then check them regularly. And in hot, dry weather, add a small sponge to the trap to prevent the moths drying out. Basically, because it's a clear container, it'll act a bit like a greenhouse. Do remember where you put the trap. I've certainly been on site and we've sort of wandered off to go and look at other interesting things, coming back maybe after half an hour. And it's surprising how similar all the different shrubs and bushes look. So it's really important to make sure you remember where you put them. And if you're on a site that's big enough that you want to trap for several different species at a time, do make sure that where you put the lures means that they are well away from each other and the scent plumes from each won't be overlapping. And then the final thing is just persistence. Just keep trying, and then sooner or later you will succeed. So at the bottom here, I've shown a little bit of a food plant, a little bit more of a food plant, and there is a wasp-like clearwing moth round about the food plants. And then the wind is coming from that direction. So then you put the pheromone lure upwind so that its scent is blown onto the food plants where hopefully the moths are, as opposed to being blown away from it. And then hopefully the moths will fly to the lure. So that's how you use them. Okay. This you're going to think, oh my goodness, how on earth can I read all that? It's basically a list which shows all 12 species, the food plant they're on, the flight season, the flight times, how rare they are, and shows which lure can be used for them. Again, this is likely to be on the website, so don't frantically start scribbling stuff down. And this information is also available in other places. The counties shows that not all the species are seen in all our counties. Some of them have got a much more southern distribution. Some of them it's because simply the habitat is not right in all our counties. Some of them prefer very wet conditions, some of them are on short grassland. So yes, there's a lot of information on there. I'll leave it up a little bit longer for you to have a quick look at, and maybe you can see which food plants you got locally and you might be able to trap for in your county. Right, any questions?
Yes, Sue, there are a couple of questions. You've covered one asking whether the lures are for separate species or for genus, and you've covered that there, but
Yep.
Perhaps you say a little bit more about the fact that some of the lures can be used for more than one species. I don't know, I'll leave that to you. And then a question from, that question, by the way, was from, if I've pronounced it right, which is very unlikely, If Dylan. I'm sorry if I've pronounced your name wrong, I bet I have. And then the question from Brian Cassie about where do we have Clearwings? And I'm not sure whether he means, because you've written in the USA, whether he means what sort of habitat are they in, or whether he means, because he goes on to say that he has seen two.
Right.
So he obviously knows he's got them around him. I think he means what sort of habitat would you be looking in?
Okay. Right, I'll answer the second one first. Basically, they're found in a variety of habitats, and it depends where you are and which species are around. In the United States, they will attack a lot of fruit trees, and there are some which attack, I think, sugarcane. There's some which attack squashes and other cucurbits. So it just depends what species you've got around. There is greater density of them in the more tropical areas. We've got the fewer. And my brain's going a bit like a sieve. So could you remind me of the first question again? Yes. Oh yes, it's are the pheromone lures specific?
Yes.
Yes, generally they are, but because they are man-made, some of them probably aren't absolutely close enough, so they can attract other species as well. So So that's why some of them are down against more than one species. And some of them you need to actually use two of them together, because that more closely mimics what the female is putting out. But as they develop them, they are getting more accurate. So quite specific, because obviously a female sallow clearwing doesn't want a male lunar hornet clearwing turning up, because it serves no purpose for either. So the chemicals really are quite specific. The man-made ones are mimicking well, but probably not quite as good as Mother Nature, as usual. Any more?
Right, thanks for that, Sue. And I should have pronounced the name, I'll probably get it wrong again now, but I should have pronounced it Aoife, I think. Yes, the other question is, does the hornet clearwing only feed on true black poplar, or will it feed on some of the hybrids between that species and others?
I'm going to go through each of the 12 species in our region, and within that I will talk about the food plants a bit. So I'll deal with that in the next section.
All right, thank you, Sue. That's all the questions for now, I think. I hope I haven't missed one, but I think that's it. So
okay,
carry on, please.
Right, and here we have the hornet moth. So as I started to say, the different species do have different food plant preferences. So what I've done is I've gone through each of our 12 species, and for each of them I've tried to list their habitat, how the larvae feed, which lures they're drawn to, and status, and anything else which seems helpful. And I've also tried to pick out on the photographs the things which makes them different from any of the others, because quite a few of them share similar features, but all of them have got unique features which will help you identify them in the field. So the hornet moth is our largest, and it goes for mature poplar species, including aspen, black, white, grey hybrids. So yes, it will feed on a range of poplars, to my knowledge. And those can be found not just in what you might call the countryside, but in parks and large gardens, but always on damper soil where the poplar species are going to be thriving. The larvae of this species feed just under the bark at the base of the tree, and they overwinter for 2 or even 3 winters. And as they leave, characteristic holes are left, and sometimes that includes the pupal case, so it can be quite distinctive if you look around the base. I've not been lucky enough to see that, but I have seen photos. There is a specific lure for this species, and if you look at the things I'm picking out on this photograph, you can see it hasn't got a yellow collar, it's got 2 yellow flashes, it's got a red patch on the thorax, and those things mark it out as opposed to the lunar hornet moth. It's also got a yellow head. And it's important to think about all these things, because if you've got a worn specimen, you may find that some of those features aren't there, but if it's got a yellow head, it's still definitely a hornet moth. It's a nationally notable bee species. It's quite widespread. That doesn't mean that it's got a large population, but it's over a large area. It may be locally common, but it is actually quite rarely recorded. And with each generation taking 3 to 4 years, this is our longest living clearwing moth, and it is our largest. I'm not sure if that makes it one of our longest living moths of any sort. It may well be. And the reason for the long generation time is probably due to the fact that the food is actually very poor nutritionally. And this is the lunar hornet moth, and this is much more common, and is seen by people often as it emerges resting on the tree trunks. It also has a very specific lure, the lun lure. And if you look at this one, you can see it's got a yellow collar, no red, and it's got a black head. So superficially, very, very similar. Both of them look, and as they fly past, you think, oh, it's a hornet, but it's not. And these are our two hornet clearwing species. And this one is within, both of them are actually within traps. So I went to College Lake with one of the local moth recorders, Neil Fletcher, and we were lucky enough to have one specimen come into the trap. So do I need to say anything else? I think that's about it. Right. Okay, the white bard's clearing. This is only found within Berkshire at the moment, and it also likes damp woodland, but this time it looks to birch and alder. So because it lives in birch, it can also be found on heathland, and that's something else that we don't tend to find in Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire so much. Again, they feed in the lower part of the trunk and also the roots of leaves, and they only overwinter usually once before emerging in May. And they've got the tip lure, and that also attracts the current clearwing. So if you're using the tip lure, you've got to think which species has come to the trap, and one of those indicators can be what food plants are around. So this one, you can note that it's got white bands on the antennae, it's got its go faster stripes on the thorax, a spot and a stripe. And when we come to the current clearwing, it's slightly different. It hasn't got the white bands, and I think it's got an all black thorax. Could be wrong on that, but you've got the photos of that later. We have 3 clearwing species with red belts, which can cause confusion, but actually they've all got things which immediately mark them out. The red-belted clearwing is something which loves old apple trees especially, so it can be found in orchards, allotments, gardens. It's got a preference for older trees, but it can use younger trees too, and it tends to go for wounded trees. And again, the larva burrows just beneath the bark, emerging after one winter. And if you find a tree that's been used, it might be used successively over many years, so you can find the scars lower down. This is one where they are still developing the lures, I think. So there's a range of lures and combination of lures. It's one of those species which is possibly under-recorded, and this, I don't know, it could be because the pheromones are more difficult to use for this species. To differentiate it from the large red-belted clearwing, yes, it is slightly smaller than the large, but you won't know that until they're both side by side. But if you look at its face, then it's got pale labial palps, and that's the most distinctive thing that separates those 2 species. So this one was brought to a lure at Hotspur, which is our butterfly conservation reserve in this area. Okay, this is the large red-belted clearwing, and it's possibly declining. We've had very few records of this, and you can tell that it's the large red-belted because it has orange palps. It also has reddish bases to the wings, as well as those red bands on the abdomen. And on both of these species, the red-belted and the large red-belted, the tips of the wings are just black. There is no red there at all. And this is a species which uses downy and silver birch, living in the branches and cut stumps, again tunneling under the bark, and again 1 year. It is attracted to the colour. Anything else to tell you? Yes, it's possibly a species which is declining. It's something we need more records of to find out what is happening to this species. Okay, red-tipped clearwing. This is one, to my mind, one of the easier ones to identify because it's got red tips to the wings and it's got the red belt. It is also one of our most common and widespread clearwing species in this region. Again, damp habitats, wherever willows occur. It does use a variety of willow species. Seems to love goat willow, Salix caprea the best. It feeds in the small branches and forms a gall, which is different from some of the other ones which were tunnelling into the wood. So it's a gall causer, and this one will overwinter twice before emerging. And it's drawn to the FOR4 lure. But I managed to see it twice last year without a lure, so it's out there and for anybody to find. So one was at College Lake, and that was actually within a building. So always keep your eyes out. You never know where you're going to find things. The sallow clearwing likes damp, poorly drained habitats, which are very rich in willows. Again, it likes goat willow and it likes grey willows, and they burrow into stems and again leaving a scar or gall, and they overwinter twice. There's a specific new lure for this which is causing some excitement, the SAL, the SAL lure, because otherwise this species is really seldom seen. The one shown here was only the second buck sighting ever, and people were able to go out with lures, and we got quite a few more sightings and were able to nail down its distribution a little bit better subsequent to seeing this. So there are many more sightings in even years of sallow clearwings. Now obviously overwinters twice, but it does indicate that it possibly came to the country as a single event, so that as each takes 2 years to mature, that's why the first one came over in an even year, so the next ones came out in an even year. But there are 1 or 2 records from odd years. That could be another influx event, or it could just be that a few of the caterpillars overwintered for an extra season. Again, it's nationally notable bee. It may be locally common. We've got far too records to know that. The current clearwing is extremely similar to this. This has got an all black thorax, and the current clearwing has got marks on the thorax. I got that wrong earlier. So all black thorax and these lines, and it's a sallow clearwing. And this one was nectaring, but it is actually quite unusual for clearwings to be found nectaring. Okay, here is the current clearwing, and you can see it's got go faster stripes, and it's got 2 stripes across the abdomen as the sallow had. So they are very similar. They've got very different food plants, so that can be one indicator of what you've got there. So unlike the sallow clearwing, this one tends to be found in gardens, allotments and fruit farms, where it may not be that popular. Blackcurrant is its favoured food plant, but it seems to go for all the currant species, red currants and gooseberries, where they're growing in sunshine. And it bores into the larger stems, creating a long gallery in the centre of the stem. So if you cut a stem, it's got a hollow black centre, it may be that a clearwing has been feeding. And this goes to the tip lure again, and sometimes in numbers. Okay, and just to note here that the number of abdominal stripes also indicates the gender of the insect that you're looking at. So the male has 4 abdominal stripes, the female only has 3. But you can see from this must be a male because it was taken to a lure, but it's quite difficult to count those stripes. I can definitely see 3, but is that the 4th one, or is that the 4th one there? So do look at other things to help confirm what species you've got. It's almost certainly a very under-recorded species. Yellow-legged clearwing, deciduous woodlands, parks and hedgerows. This is one that lives on oak and related species, and also wych elm. And this seems to live in recently felled trees, the stumps of recently felled trees. presumably the sap's still rising in those. And this will come to the Vez lure. And this is a species where females are known to nectar on brambles, so you can also look out for it there. It seems to be very local and not present in high numbers. Again, active woodland management may help this species. The orange-tailed clearwing. Oh look, it's got an orange tail. That really helps. It's always good when they say what they are. This is one of the two species that you will regularly find on chalk habitats. So chalk scrub downland, where you've got either of the viburnum species, you will find this. And it burrows into the branches and overwinters twice before emerging. And apparently it leaves a 3 mm hole covered with a disc of bark, which is quite distinctive. It's the only species with a broad orange and black tail, and the 2 orange bands as well. It's one of our least common species. If you are looking after a nature reserve patch of ground and you're managing it, you may think about keeping some viburnum so that this species can be encouraged. This is probably my favourite and the easiest to see of all the clearwing species in my mind, as long as you've got some chalk grassland with lots of bird's foot trefoil on it. It's very common and widespread as far as I'm concerned. It will use kidney vetch as well, and sometimes you can see where a plant is dying, and that may be because of the caterpillars nibbling away at the lower stems and the roots. It's very, very quickly drawn to the appy lure, and if you're only going to buy one lure, I'd go for this one, because you throw the lure on the ground in the right conditions, and within 5 minutes you've got 10. I had 24 at one site, all coming to the little bag and flying around it. It's absolutely enthralling. You don't need to trap them, and it's fascinating to watch them. It is nationally notable, but as I say, it seems to be locally common, because everywhere where I've trapped for it, I've found it. So I've seen it at College Lake and Dancers End, Nivingholme, Grangelands, Bradnam, and there haven't necessarily been sightings on those sites before. It's a really good way of establishing them. And this is one where I've actually seen both the male and the female, because I had a casual record of a female at College Lake, and then this is a male that we trapped at, or we drew to a lure at College Lake, and you can see the difference in the number of bands on the abdomen. And this is a small creature, very beautiful, absolutely delightful. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is also the clearwing you're most likely to see without a lure. So if you go to a patch of dense bird's foot trefoil, keep your eye out for a small insect. Is that a wasp? Isn't it a wasp? It flies not quite in the way of a wasp. Its wings you can see as a bit of a blur, whereas a wasp, I don't think you can see the wings as they move. And it also seems a bit clumsy. So if you follow it and find it when it actually lands, you may be lucky enough to find that you have actually got a 6-belted clearwing without a lure. It's also a species that you can easily sweep into a net, and that's a way that a lot of people will find this species. So that's a 6-belted clearwing, possibly my favourite. And the raspberry clearwing is in a slightly different, it's not family. Anyway, it's less related to the others. And it's a recent introduction to this country. It's well named as a raspberry clearwing, although it will also go for brambles. In Europe, they will use wild brambles and raspberry, but there's no such records in the UK yet. At the moment, they seem to be restricted to raspberry canes in gardens. And it only arrived on the Herts-Cambridgeshire border in 2007, almost certainly imported, as quite a few of our new insects are. It does bore into the base of raspberry canes and they form a gall. and it emerges after 2 winters. So it'll be interesting to see if this one turns out to be another species, in this case, which is seen most often in odd years. Superficially looks like the 6-belted clearwing and possibly the yellow-legged clearwings, but the habitat requirement is quite different. Okay, any questions?
Yes, Sue, there are a couple of questions.
Okay.
One of them is the sizes of the adults that you're giving in millimeters.
Yes.
Are they the length of the forewing or the length of the body?
Good question.
That was a question from Andy Bolton. So you can thank Andy for posing you a question that's got you thinking.
I suspect there's not much difference between the two. I was referring to dimensions given in one of the books, which most of us will have on our shelves. So it should say, I think most of the dimensions are in forewings in the book. So it's probably that, but I think from having seen them at rest, usually the wing is the similar length to the body on most of these species.
All right, thank you. Also from Duncan, he was asking whether we want records of the characteristic exit holes, and I replied, yes, we do, please, but I thought I'd better bring that up with you just in case you're going to say no, it's too difficult to tell what caused the hole. So do we want records of exit holes as well as records of the actual insects themselves?
I would have thought that it's a good idea to get records of those. I don't know how well they can be dealt with on our record and by the county moth recorders yet. They would certainly need to have information about the habitat, have good photographs, and hopefully the pupal case, because there are lots of insects which will emerge from wood. A lot of the longhorn beetles, various other beetles. So just the presence of a hole is an indicator you could have clearwings there, but I think you need to be careful that it is a clearwing and not another species or group of insects.
Yeah, I think, Sue, that if we had the record sent in with a photo of you suggest of the hole to the county moth recorders, then if they wanted to follow up, they could take a lure to the site and see what they can find. So I think better to have the records than not, but we can't always follow up on everything because people's time is limited. So yes, please, can we have the holes recorded? And then some more questions have come in. Apparently, there are records of the raspberry clearwing on wild raspberry in Kent.
Oh, excellent. Good.
But the wild raspberry was growing in a garden. We are told by Graham. So I'm not quite sure how wild it is if it's growing in a garden. Anyway.
That's an interesting one, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And then another question from Duncan, which is a very good question. That if the bird's foot trefoil is growing in neutral to acid grassland, can it still have 6-belted clearwing, or is it only to be found on chalk grassland?
I suspect it's the presence of the plant rather than the calcareous nature, and I say that because I've found it at the Arncott MOD site, which is not known for being, it's not a chalky site. It's got areas which are base rich because of concrete and the like, which has encouraged the plant. So somehow the moth has got there. So I would have thought that it's more to do with the plant than it is with the nature of the underlying geology. Having said that, they've got to spread from somewhere. So they've got to move from areas where they are found in reasonable quantities. But basically, until we start using the lures on every patch of bird's foot trefoil we can find, we may not know. So it's worth trying. and it's worth seeing if they are there, and that may well increase our knowledge. But I'd have thought certainly neutral soils, I don't see why they wouldn't be there.
Right, thank you for that. And then Caroline has asked, how far do they fly? Obviously they stay local, but how far can they spread?
I don't know is the answer. I believe it depends on the species as to how far they will fly. After all, as far as the male's concerned, you know, it's using up energy to try and find a female, which may or may not have been found by another male first. So it needs to be sure of its best chance. So that will determine how far it will fly. It may be that species which have a more dense population won't fly as far as those which have a more distributed population. I don't know. I mean, this may be one of the questions we can answer by doing more trapping. But I'd be happy to know if anybody does know the actual answer to that. But this Goodyear, when she trapped in her garden, seemed to be getting individuals which were coming from several hundred meters away at least. But I don't know. I'd have to question Liz Goodyear herself to find out where her nearest habitat was for the species that came to her.
All right, thanks, Sue. Now we've had a helpful answer from Julian Howe, who tells us that the measurements of forewing length in Waring and Tolman are, I just told you what they are, they're the measurements of the forewing. So
there you go.
Thank you, Julian, for that, really helpful. And then a question from Nick Osler. When you catch a clearwing moth in a trap and then open the trap, will the moth be docile, I assume he means, and stay there to be observed, or will it just zip straight out again?
Question is, the thing is, if you're lucky, when we trapped for the lunar hornet, the one we found there did stay long enough for both of us to take a few photos before it zipped off. The six-belted clearwing seemed to go bananas, but then they'll sometimes then just sit on a nearby flower for ages, and you can take loads of photos of it. So the photo at the beginning of this presentation, the lure had been put out, and then obviously the male got a bit bored and went and sat elsewhere and waited to have its photo taken. So I suspect it depends on all sorts of things. If there's a genuine,
can I suggest that
whatever,
before you open the trap, put it somewhere in the shade, if it wasn't already in the shade. Get it as cool as you can, because the moth is going to be more active if it's hot. So definitely, if you're worried about them flying away before you've had time to get a good look or a photo, move the trap somewhere as cold as you can get it on the site.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say take it home and put it in the fridge, because that's not fair on the moth. So don't take it home and put it in the fridge, but find somewhere cool on the site, so that when you do open it, the moth is as cool as you can get it under those conditions that day.
Yeah, and most of the commercial traps are fairly see-through, so that even if it's moving around, you should be able to get some idea of the features.
All right, thank you. Now we've got some more information about whether you can find the six-belted away from chalk. Graham Davies tells us that he's seen it on limestone grassland. And then Caroline says that she's taken six-belted clearwings in a sandy quarry with bird's-foot trefoil in South Links. And although there is limestone around, it's not actually there in that particular quarry.
Yep, I think it's down to how well the plant is growing.
Yep. And according to Graham, who's a mine of information, he's telling us that on iRecord, you can record not only the stage recorded, if you go into the separate projects, and there is one for moths, and not just use the casual recording form. And there you can put down whether you've seen evidence of holes, mines, exuvia, and so on. And he personally has found holes that he thought, I assume thought, were hornet moth, and went back the following year and found the adults.
Excellent. So it's definitely worth logging them, so you can go back and have a look.
And Bill Mansfield says that as the raspberry clearwing moth was found in Cambs and is now found in many other counties as well, it's obviously spread quite quickly over quite a large distance. He doesn't know how far the pheromones will attract them from, but he suspects they are capable of flying quite long distances, otherwise they wouldn't have moved from the original Cambridgeshire into other counties.
Yep.
Graham Davies also tells us about a bit more about iRecord, which I think we've really just said about recording different stages.
Yep.
And there's some praise for you, and then a question.
Nope.
It would be good to reiterate the importance of not using a pheromone more than once in a season or by multiple people, because once you've got a record from the site, it's best to leave the moths alone. I don't know if you would like to comment on that.
There could well be merit in that. Yes, I can understand that, especially with the rarer species. With some of the more things like the six-belted, they can be so numerous that another side to that is it makes a very good learning opportunity where you've got a lot of the moth around that you can show to other people. But for things, for the rarer species, then yes, I think it's probably a good idea to live and let live.
Presumably, if the male is attracted to the lure, provided it hasn't come very far, so I would say don't leave the lure out for a long time.
Yes.
And then as soon as the male has discovered it's looking at a plastic bung and not a tasty female, it will just go off and look for a tasty female instead.
They do, yes.
So yes, Eleanor says they're wasting their valuable resource flying around looking at the lures, which is absolutely true. But
yes,
if the lure, so I agree with her about not going back and repeatedly trying to attract the same species at the same site. But I think if the lure is only out for a short time on the one occasion that you're there, it shouldn't do very much damage. But I could be wrong because I've got no evidence to back that up.
The other thing to say is that the females are not affected. So, and I don't know whether the males will mate more than once, but in this sense, probably the females are more valuable and they will be unaffected by any use of lures. Because you're unlikely to take all the males away and exhaust all of them.
Yes. And Bill Mansfield has chipped in as well. Eleanor, by the way, came back to say she thinks you're right about the lure being a great educational tool, especially with kids. And Bill Mansfield says that he thinks it's very important, probably not trapping every day or frequently, but occasionally at the same site to try and get an idea of the flight period, when it starts and when it ends. Because with climate change, we're going to want to know how the flight times are affected.
Yes, that was also one thing I was going to say is, well, two things. One is to check out your local moth blog site, because there will be information there on what people have been seeing, and that's worth keeping an eye on, because then you'll get an idea of where the flight times are in your particular year. And obviously it's going to be a bit later this year. It was early last year.
So that's, if I may just interrupt, I'm not sure that's right. If you look at the flight times of butterflies at the moment, they're actually as early as they've ever been, but very small numbers. So a very small number of creatures which happen to be pupated where it's very sunny and perhaps in some way protected from frost are coming out very early this year, because we had a very warm March actually, and then a lot of sunshine in April. So I think, although I would agree that probably the peak flight times are going to be a little bit delayed, the very first flights might not.
But the main thing is keep an eye on your blog site.
Yes, definitely.
And then you will know, because you'll be following what is actually happening out on site.
Yep.
And the other thing is, if you do find one of the rarer species, do let your local county moth recorders know, so that they can help find out, verify what you've said, and possibly lure in the surrounding area, so they can find out a bit more about the population in that area and add to our knowledge, which adds to our ability to conserve them, of course.
Okay, well, those are the questions for now. We'll probably get some more, but if you want to carry on, please.
Okay, There's not much left to go through. I was just going to give you some sources of information. So most of my information has come from the Field Guide to Moths of Great Britain and Ireland, and its sister volume on caterpillars. Those two together give you good information on the moths and the caterpillars. And there's also good information in the Britain's Day Flying Moths book, and some lovely photos in there. 3 good websites are UK Moths, the Butterfly Conservation A to Z of Moths, and then here is our local blog spot, and I'm sure that there will be some available in most counties. And again, here is Anglian Lepidoptera supplies. They get a certain number of lures ordered or made up each year. Once they've gone, they've gone. So if you miss it that year, you'll have to order them the next year. But they're quite helpful and quite quick. Right, and yes, new editions are available of some of these books. Okay, so I would say that more so than many other groups of moths, the Clearwings are under-recorded, and your records will make a great deal of impact on what is known about the numbers and distribution of these species. As some are urban, you can record from the comfort of your garden. Costs, including postage, is roughly about £9. You can make that less if you buy a bulk purchase. And used over 3 summers, that comes out about £3 a year. So it may cost a lot initially, but I think it's good value. And of course, you can use them with groups of people, not just for yourself. And you can buy the lures on their own, or they do groups, so that there's the classic 6, I think it is. So you can choose which species that you will get the pheromone lures for based on your local habitats. And again, if you record any rare species, please contact your local moth recorders. So there's an opportunity for others to investigate what's going on, so we can find out where things are living and help maintain their habitats. And also to say, other species can also be drawn to the lures, just like moth trapping with a light, beetles and flies, and you can record these, and I record too, because all records of all wildlife is valuable. So I hope you enjoy finding and observing these fascinating and I think beautiful little moths, and thank you to all who have helped in preparing this presentation, especially those who allowed their photos to be used, and for those who've assisted with the technical side of things tonight. I think that's me, apart from final questions.
All right, thank you very much there, Sue. Thank you. We had a message in the chat from Bill Mansfield to tell us that there's a book about Clearwings. The Clearwings, well, it's actually, if I pronounce this right, the Cecidae, I probably didn't say that right, of Europe. And
Okay.
he's put a link here to Pemberley Books in the chat. Pemberley Books being a bookseller rather than a book publisher, I think.
Yes.
But anyway, the pemberleybooks.com website has a book called The Cecidae of Europe, and it says 2640, which is probably the number of the product on their website.
Great.
Right, and then we're getting in lots and lots of people saying how brilliant your talk was, well done, and
Good.
also that you can get the lures from Atropus, I think.
Excellent.
But I'm not sure whether Bill means the lures. It says also available from Atropus, so perhaps Bill means the book. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, Atropus is a great source of information for all things moth related. So search for Atropus on a website. You'll find lots of information there. And if I may, Sue, I'll just pop in a comment.
Yep.
You mentioned, it made me think of it, you mentioned that you can buy the lures in groups or sets.
Yes.
And it made me think about the fact that one way to go out and see that these lures in use is to find out about your local moth group. So I know, for instance, in Berkshire, there's a very active moth group based around Reading, and they go out with lures. And there are other groups too. So in Buckinghamshire, there's a group called Big that go out occasionally with lures. And I'm sure there are groups in other places. We've got people listening into this talk from all over the UK and America. So there are bound to be groups who are going out there with their lures. It isn't just an individual thing. You don't have to just be a single, somewhat lonely Larry to do this. You can go out and do it with other people too, people who are doing it already and will be very happy to take you in.
Definitely.
I'm seeing an awful lot of praise. Yes, and Bill Mansfield has clarified what I thought and I should have guessed. He's saying the book is available from Atropos.
Okay.
Apparently there's a book on the Lepidoptera of Poland. This is Cobra, tells us that the Natural History Book Service or shop, www.nhbs, they're advertising a book called Cecidae Lepidoptera of Poland. I'm reading through it. It's hard to get. There are so many people saying nice things about you, Sue. It'd be far too embarrassing to read them all out.
Oh, thank you very much. It was excellent. And as someone else said, just the information I needed to take the plunge. I knew nothing about clearwing moths at the beginning, so I'm now hooked. Thank you very much.
And I just point out, Effie, if I've pronounced it right, I probably got it wrong this time, ask if there's a moth group near Abingdon. And I know there are people who are very interested in moths in that area, but I'm not sure they've actually formed a group. There was someone who lived in that area that asked me a little while ago to put them in touch with other moth people in the area, which we did. And 3 or 4 of them met a couple of times, I think, but I'm not sure whether, I think COVID-19 probably put paid to those group meetings there, but it's worth going on to the Upper Thames branch moth blog and saying that you're interested to go out with other people or meet with other people in the Abingdon area, and I'm sure you'll get some response. So try that. Try doing going on the moth blog. In our area, it's the Upper Thames branch moth blog, but there are moth blogs all over the country, I'm sure. So just go on there and say you'd like to join other mothers and see what sort of response you get. I'm sure you'll be welcomed with open arms.
Okay. Shall I stop sharing?
We've got, yes, thank you, Sue. We've got a message from Cobra about in Belgium they buy the pheromones from the Netherlands because there is a specialist pheromone seller over there called www.pherobank.com. So Pherobank, P-H-E-R-O bank.com. And for the minute, the masses and masses of congratulations seem to have dried up, as do the questions. So we just wait for a little while and see if any more questions come in. I think we may have exhausted the questions there.
Okay, just a side issue. If you go to some of the places in the more tropical areas, some clearwings are definitely known as pests, and in the States, the peach borer is known to be a very damaging species. I think we're lucky that our ones are so well behaved and so beautiful.
I think there was another question. Do you have a link to the Atropos lures?
Yeah, I think if you remember, Carla, Bill told us that he was talking about the books. Do you remember Bill replied? He made a comment which could have referred to either, but then he replied it was the books. In fact, he's replied again now, it's the book.
Oh, it is the book. Sorry.
It's all right.
It just popped up, so I shouldn't give him a question.
Well, I think, Carla, if you're prepared to do so, we could say that we'll stop recording because I think we've exhausted most of the questions. Thank you very much, Carla, once again. Everybody who's listening in know that Carla's put in hours of time hosting all these meetings for us and done a really good job. Thanks, Carla.
Thank you. Excellent learning curve for me too, and I get to re-watch them all. Okay, I will stop recording now. Thank you very much.